celebrate also the progress that India has made in climate financing and achieving its climate goals, but also talk about where we fall short and where our ambition is and how we can work together to achieve that. Mr. Sinha set the stage very well, and we worked together during his time in NITI and promoting the India's electric mobility. And building on that, I'd like to talk a little bit more broadly about the transport sector overall, and then how this fits in the context of the climate change and climate finance. So, achieving the climate goals of India, and I also want to highlight that, also importantly, achieving India's development goals. They need to go hand in hand, right? And this means many things in practice, in transport sector. So this is cleaner buses and trucks, more and better metros, green shipping and ports, safer walking and cycling network, but also efficient logistics and infrastructure network that can withstand floods, heat, and other disruptions. When it comes to delivering on climate ambition in transport sector and mobility, neither the latest technological advancement nor the most comprehensive policy reform package will be sufficient on their own. What we ultimately need is the ability to turn the good ideas and solutions into bankable and scalable programs. And here's why. We're dealing with a problem of enormous scale. India's cities are growing by around order of 9-10 million people a year, and there are around 25 million new vehicles coming into the market every year. And e-commerce and urban delivery is also growing somewhere between 10 and 15% a year. Even with the significant investments that India has been making in metro construction and national schemes for electric buses, medically speaking, we are playing catch up. The good news is that, as highlighted earlier, that India is not short of capital. The country has very large and growing domestic institutional pools. You will pull from the insurance funds, mutual funds, other pensions and other sources of finance, and we already have comfortably the order of 100 to 150 lakh crore rupees available from major domestic institutional capital. The issue is not whether the capital exists. The issue is whether transport projects are structured clearly enough to absorb the capital at scale. Too often we speak about financing gap as if the only problem is the money problem. But the harder problem is the project readiness. Investors and lenders ask very simple questions. Can the city or agency procure well? Are the service contracts enforceable? Is the payment security mechanism credible? And demand risk manageable? And can we also measure the development and climate outcomes in a credible way that gives the confidence to the market? When these things are weak, capital is expensive or absent. When they are strong, capital can scale. So my core proposition is capital moves when climate ambition is translated into clarity. Clarity on pipeline, clarity on revenues and payments, clarity on risk allocation, and clarity on measurable outcomes. So what does this mean? First, it means pipeline clarity. One of the most important shifts that we would like to promote in transport finance is to move away from treating de-risking of transport sector on a project-by-project basis and move towards embedding this more systematically in national or subnational transport strategies. That means thinking about transport not just as a collection of engineering projects with the DPRs and PPP transactions, but as a portfolio of assets that can be prepared, standardized, the standard is very important, standardized, de-risked, refinanced, and eventually monetized. As it begins to be specific about the market we are trying to unlock, it's also important that we need to be very specific about the market we are trying to unlock, because transport is not one market. Public bus contracting is one market, metro finance is another, freight rail is another. Each has different risk profile, different counterparties, and different financing solutions. Once the market is defined, The next step is to diagnose the binding risks that through market engagement and data. Here is what the MDBs can help enable the public sector by facilitating the early market engagement. We have done across all our previous projects. We engage operators, OEMs, lenders, and public authorities to identify what is actually stopping capital. Is it technology risk, payment risk, liquidity risk, demand or regulatory or foreign exchange or refinancing? To understand their risk appetite and to identify their pain point and discover the most appropriate mechanisms to de-risk or allocate risk so that we can unlock certain markets. Unfortunately, there's no shortcut, right? And then also there are different markets that require different levels of due diligence that is repeated so that be able to unlock each and every market systematically. We have been doing this with various government counterparts for highways, for waterways, electric buses, railways, and metros, and more to be done in areas of also multimodal infrastructure, logistics systems, and so on. The second clarity I want to talk about is the payment clarity. Many transport investments have strong public good characteristics. They are economically essential, but often they are financially self-sustaining, just based on the fare box revenues or user charges alone. So that doesn't mean that the commercial capital has no role to play. It means that the public authorities have to create credible operating frameworks and credible payment system. So India's e-bus push is one very good example. At the beginning, the binding constraints in the spirit of assessing the risk of specific markets, right? So if you look back the history, the trajectory of India's e-bus market, the beginning, the binding constraint was high upfront cost, new technology risk, and uncertain performance, and fragmented tender from city to city. But when the sector began to scale eventually, the core risk became the payment and counterparty risk. This is why the PM e-bus PSM mattered. It is not just marginal interventions. Its outlay is large, over 3,400 crores, and designed to support deployment of more than 38,000 e-buses and can support operations up to 12 years. This is what systematic de-risking looks like. Not one transaction, but a market-making framework that gives the operators and financiers greater confidence that the contracts will be honored. The same logic applies to metro. India's metro system has expanded exponentially with now over 1,000 kilometers of network operating around 26 cities. This is a major progress. But looking back, they have been delivered largely through public resources and only about 5% of funding coming from private or commercial sources. And this is due to various risks, demand risk and credit and liquidity, and construction risk also during the first phase of delivering these very capital intensive and engineering heavy projects. With more ambitious plan in the future, whereby India is planning to expand the metro network by over 2,500 kilometers across 35 cities, this estimated capital requirement is around $85 billion US. We need to take a good look at the financing model. Can we make metro investment more bankable and scalable? Currently, we are experimenting in one of our projects to introduce systematic de-risking in metro by setting up binding service level agreement between the state government and the metro company. And this enforceable contract is what makes metro project bankable, with which the metro SPVs can go to the market and raise financing. And the World Bank will be supporting the structuring of this service level agreement, in addition, and provide the liquidity support facility to reduce the short-term liquidity risks associated with the payment from the public sector to the metro company. This MDB-backed liquidity support facility further reduces risks, and this structure, if successful, will make the metro entity financeable to banks at the portfolio level, not only on a project-by-project basis. The third I'd like to talk about is the capital recycling. So by creating this value, the asset class, you create something that can be refinanced, traded in the market once these systems are up and running. This is a part that is often unappreciated. This is an integral component when we talk about the circularity of capital. So when you have concessional or public resources or international financing from MDBs, the finance that has high opportunity cost goes to these capital projects. They need to be leveraged over time. Sometimes the early risk of the project is too high to mobilize, crowd in the private and commercial capital from the outset. The market expects that the early risks are addressed, discovered, and the mitigation measures are in place. So the way we think about mobilization in this context is not, you have a PPP project where public money and private money is blended from the outset, but more public money going in during the early phase. And once the project is stabilized, has a stabilized revenues and the business model is proven, then you will be refinancing from the market. That's a very important way. Then that public resources can be redeployed to the next project, and through which you can achieve the multiple times of leveraging over a period of time at the portfolio level. So we have one example in the Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor. It was a highly capital-intensive project, and then we helped financing its early stages when the construction and execution risks were still high. And then once the asset matured, refinancing became possible on better terms. In December 2025, the IRFC refinanced nearly 10,000 crores of the FCCI's World Bank debt, yielding a significant benefit both from interest rate savings as well as replacing foreign currency exposure with rupee financing. This is exactly how capital recycling should work. Scarce development finance takes the early, hard-to-estimate risk, and lower-cost domestic capital comes in later once the asset becomes more legible to the market. So when we talk about clarity in climate finance for transport, infrastructure, and mobility, I think we mean 5 things. Clarity of pipeline, steady flow of prepared projects, and not one-off announcements. Second, clarity of cash flow, who pays, how, and with what payment security. Clarity on risk allocation, what sits with the government, what sits with operator, and what can be guaranteed, insured, or refinanced. Fourth, clarity of outcomes, emissions, resilience, access, safety, and inclusion measured credibly and verifiably. And fifth, clarity on institutional ownership with a strong accountability structure, not in a fragmented way. So in transport and mobility, the climate challenge is not just mobilize more capital, but to make capital more confident. Thank you very much.